Well, it could be weeks before we know what led to Gabby Petito's death. As we wait for the final autopsy results, we've learned the coroner has ruled her death a homicide. Now, weeks before Petito died, a 911 caller said he saw a man who was traveling in a white van with Florida license plates allegedly hit a woman in Utah. Petito and her fiancé Brian Laundrie were traveling in a van that matches that description. Laundrie, though, is not charged with any crimes at this time, but investigators are calling him a person of interest in this case. Petito's story has started a conversation nationwide about domestic violence. An analysis by the Violence Policy Center found 92% of women murdered in 2018 were killed by men they knew. So I want to bring in Kiersten Stewart. She is the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at Futures Without Violence, a nonprofit that works to end violence against women and children. Kiersten, thanks for joining us this morning. And, you know, we saw the body camera video of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie after police in Utah pulled them over. Petito visibly upset in the video. You see her right there. What was your reaction when you saw this video and you saw her demeanor? And what do you hope that people learn from seeing this story play out on social media almost in real time?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And thank you so much for taking on this issue and talking about it in the bigger context of domestic violence. My initial reaction, I think, was like everyone else's, just utter heartbreak. Especially now that we, of course, know what happened to her. We feel nothing but grief and sadness for her family. Unfortunately, what happened to her is not all that unusual in America. Domestic violence affects between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women. And it's young women like Gabby who are most affected, those 18 to 24. So you saw in her, you saw some of that fear. And that's something that I think is important to hone in on. When we talk about domestic violence, we often think about just the physical violence, but it's important to pay attention to the fear, the concern, the discussion of conflict. When you are a friend or a family member, do you see someone who's afraid? Are they afraid to disagree? Are they afraid of that person? That's one of those big warning signs that we see in that video.
As you mentioned, 1 in 3 women can find themselves in a situation where they're involved in domestic violence. So clearly, Gabby Petito, not the only woman to have a situation where they end up calling the police or have police arrive and ask them what's going on. What is fueling this domestic violence epidemic?
Well, I think it's really important to know 2 things. I mean, one, we have made enormous progress in this country in addressing domestic violence. We have seen decreases of about 2/3 in the last, 25 to 30 years. But as you point out, we're starting to see an increase again in severe physical violence, even and in homicides. We don't know for sure yet what happened, but it certainly that's what it seems like the case in Gabby's situation. So we're seeing we certainly think the pandemic may have some contribution to the overall numbers, but I think it's really important that we haven't invested enough in prevention. Somebody doesn't turn 23 and decide it's okay to start physically abusing their partner. People learn early how to treat one another, whether it's okay to use physical violence in a relationship. So we need to start much earlier, helping young people learn how to have healthy relationships. We need to talk about gender norms around how we treat one another. Domestic violence isn't always men abusing women. It can happen in same-sex relationships. It can happen, women can be the perpetrators, but it is most often men who are violent towards their female partners. So we need to really engage men more and also being leaders and role models, right, and changing the social norms.
Kiersten, is there one group or more than one group where domestic violence affects that group more than another?
Yeah, that is one of the important things we've learned over time, which is some of our prevention efforts have been really successful, but not for everybody. So African-American women and Native American and Indigenous women experience the highest rates of domestic violence, and particularly severe domestic violence, including homicide. So it's important that we, pay attention to what happened to Gabby. And again, we offer nothing but the deepest sympathies to her family. We also need to know that there's a lot more women out there who are affected. And we really hope the news media will continue to cover this issue, even past the Gabby story.
Kiersten Stewart, thank you. And as a reminder, if you or someone you know needs help, the National Domestic Violence Hotline has counselors available around the clock. The number is 1-800-799-7233. And in our 9 o'clock hour, Vlad will speak with Sydney Persing, a reporter from our Fort Myers affiliate. She's been on the ground covering the search for Brian Laundrie in Florida. And you can stream that conversation at about 9:20 Eastern right here on CBSN.